Hello everyone, welcome to our special YouTube character profile for Deirdre.
Deirdre Barlow.
Deirdre Barlow, yeah. We recorded this just after the news broke that Anne Kirkbride had passed away, before the character left the show officially.
Yeah, that was back in January 2015, I think, in episode 133.
Yes.
And that was a massive shock, wasn't it? Because
yes.
I remember we were watching telly.
Yeah.
Was it a Monday night maybe? And then the little Sky News notification popped up on our phones, and we just couldn't believe it. Nobody had seen it coming. We knew that Anne had taken time off of Coronation Street, but it was a bit unclear.
For health reasons, but
exactly.
we didn't know what that meant.
No, not at all.
So it came how serious it was or anything.
Yeah, so it came as a huge, huge shock. So our episode 133 started off with a tribute to Anne, a obituary of her, and then that led into the character profile of Deirdre Barlow that you're about to hear now.
So that's why we sound a bit sombre, because we just heard some very, very sad news. So here is the character profile for Deirdre Barlow.
Okay, so moving on to the next segment of the podcast now, we're going to look back at Deirdre's life in full. We're going to do a character profile of Deirdre. It's surprising that we hadn't actually done her in the past, but it's obviously very suitable for this week. So Deirdre was born on the 8th of July 1955 to Donald and Blanche Hunt. She married 3 times, well, 4 if you count Ken twice. There was Ray Langton in 1975, Ken in 1981, and then again in 2005, and of course the ill-fated marriage to Samir Rashid in 1994. Only had 1 child out of that, though, Tracy in 1977, although I think one Tracy is enough for the world. So Deirdre first appeared on the 20th of November 1972 and made her last appearance on the 8th of October 2014. In total, she made 3,346 appearances on Coronation Street, which made her the 4th commonly featured character and the 4th longest running of the current characters. And, of course, Deirdre was played by the legendary Anne Kirkbride.
In 1955, she was born to corset maker Blanche Hunt and bank manager Father Donald. 7 years later, Deirdre witnessed him being run over by a car and killed. So that was before she appeared.
Yes, tragedy at a young age. I had never really even thought about anything to do with Deirdre's dad, to be honest. It's almost like...
Nah, she just
never had
generated off of like little growth on Blanche's arm. In 1972, that was when she first appeared. She was 17 years old, the character, and she was a dolly bird, Deirdre Hunt. She made her first appearance and made a play for Elsie's husband Alan before learning that he's married.
Yeah, there's a scene that's been on some of the clip shows this year of her in a smoky bar, her with a fag in her hand. I mean, that's another thing about Deirdre, isn't it? The smoking was always a big thing with her right from then, and she was chatting up these older men there, and so different. When we went to the Coronation Street tour last Christmas, Deirdre was one of the ones that these little children were looking at the pictures of and saying, "Is that really Deirdre?" Because she was so different back then. Lots of people compared how she looked back then to Claire Peacock as well.
Yes,
and there was definitely a resemblance.
Strong resemblance between the two.
Yeah, so she was only in that one episode then, but as is the case with lots of characters, she was popular, so they brought her back the next year. So she became a secretary at the Builders' Yard at Lenfaircliff's Yard. And she was employed by Ray Langton, who she was courting at the time.
So that was 1973, and then in 1974, Ray began to victimise Deirdre when he realised that she was getting closer to Billy Walker, who was 20 years older than her. They got engaged, but Billy's mum, Annie, was not pleased and thought she was a harlot.
Yes, not good enough for her Deirdre. I mean, it spoiled the bloodline, wouldn't it? Yeah, but spoiled the Walker family bloodline. And I've seen lots of good clips between Blanche and Annie. Like, Annie was obviously like so high and mighty, like Sally on steroids, and Blanche would just like almost beat her in the put downs every single time, just like this commoner putting Annie in her place. So there's some really funny scenes there. But yeah, it was not to be, because in 1975 Deirdre broke up with Billy because they both admit to having second thoughts about marrying. Now then, Deirdre had a brief fling with oil rigger Morris, which earned her a slap from Blanche, and then she was rescued by Ray when Morris pestered her a couple of weeks later. before long, Deirdre and Ray were married, living in Blanche's house together, which Ray split into two to have the husband and wife time away from the mother-in-law.
Just like Steve tried to do with him and Tracy.
Yes.
In 1976, Blanche moved to Kenilworth, and Deirdre discovered that she was pregnant and clashed with Ray because she didn't want to live on Coronation Street.
No, she had higher hopes of moving to other places. Kenilworth's quite a nice place to go. Recommended for visitors. 1977 then, she gave birth to Tracy that year, and together with Ray, she moved into number 5 Coronation Street. She fell out with Rita big time that year, though, because of their husband's unequal share of the business. Another big storyline for Deirdre later that year, because she was molested under the viaduct, and had a complete breakdown afterwards as well, and she refused to let Ray touch her, which kind of reminds me about what Anna went through when she was obviously molested by Phelan, and then she was sort of very withdrawn from Owen. She abandoned Tracy and contemplated suicide, getting close to jumping off a bridge. Talked down, luckily, by a passing taxi.
Was she?
She was passing taxi cab, I think.
In 1978, Ray had an affair with waitress Janice Stubbs and asked Deirdre to emigrate to Holland with him, but she decided to stay with Tracy, and he went without her.
Yeah, I think at the time when they, I don't remember whether the guy who played Ray chose to leave or whether he was sacked, but in any case, the producers had wanted to get rid of both of them, and then they fortunately decided, it'd be quite interesting to have a single mother character on the show, and Deirdre's popular, so they kept her in. So, I mean, and then obviously says she stayed for another however long after that, for 30 odd years after that, so thank heaven she did. And so then in 1979, that was when her single mum storyline started. So she did struggle on her own. She had to sell number 5, but moved into number 3 with Emily. I don't know whether there was much of a relationship with Emily before that. I suppose there must have been, but there's always been that link between Deirdre and Emily, hasn't there? And Emily and Tracy as well, because Emily's obviously her godmum. Yep. Really memorable moment in 1979 was when they had the first lorry crash. So Deirdre was in the back room of the Rovers with Annie, and I think Annie had knitted baby Tracy a baby grow or something like this. A massive crash, and Deirdre ran outside because maybe bad mother, she'd left Tracy out in a buggy outside the front of the Rovers.
In Scandinavia, this is what they do apparently. They leave their children outside in sub-zero temperatures.
And this was
it's just normal.
This was also the 70s as well, wasn't it? You could leave your door
Do
off
what you
the
wanted
latch.
then.
Everybody knew each other. Everyone was friends back in the 70s. But
no crime.
but yeah, so then so there was, when Deirdre went outside, there was just rubble everywhere, and hysterically, Tracy. Everyone came out. Deirdre thought that Tracy was dead. Emily took her in and tried to calm her down. And then the news came that there was no baby body underneath the wreckage. They went around to Emily and told her, so Emily went to tell Deirdre that Tracy wasn't there, but Deirdre wasn't there. She'd done a runner out the back, and then she went to try and kill herself again. I think she was going to jump in the canal, but the policewoman, by then, Tracy had been found. She'd been taken away by her friends, and Deirdre was talked down from the edge yet again. Ken also that year offered a shoulder to lean on to Deirdre, and she started to realise that maybe she would have feelings for him. But she did see Billy Walker again a bit that year too.
You've got to play the field a bit, don't you? So in 1980, she moved into the corner shop flat, and she scared Ken off by suggesting that they get married, because who would want to be Tracy's dad?
Exactly, that's probably the only thing that was putting him off.
But it was her future, her dad.
Future dad, kind of, yeah. Well, he was as good as, wasn't he, I suppose. So, 1981, Deirdre arranged another date with Ken, but he didn't show up because his car had broken down. So instead, Deirdre is like, well, dressed up and everything, can they have the date with Mike Baldwin instead? And this was the start of arguably the biggest storyline that Deirdre, or maybe even Coronation Street, ever had, one of the most memorable. So she helped Mike move into his new flat, but things were going well between them, but then she fell for Ken again at his flat warming party, at Mike's flat warming party. Mike didn't mind. He started dating Sonia for a bit, who had been come with Ken on the date. And And then, yeah, things were looking good between Deirdre and Ken for a while. She was given away by Alf at the wedding to Ken in 1981, and that was on the same day as the royal wedding between Charles and Diana, and got over 24 million viewers, beating the royal wedding. Incredible.
Also, in terms of how long they stayed together, perhaps beating them on that regard as well.
I don't know how long. I can't remember. when did Charles and Diana split up properly?
I don't know.
No, I think they beat them actually, but maybe added back together, I suppose.
Yeah, that's what I
they're
mean.
back together again. Yeah.
In 1983, Deirdre got bored of her marriage to Ken because he wasn't
That's why.
interested in having any more kids, or her really.
Just interested in books.
So she had an affair with Mike, and eventually confessed to Ken, and this led to the doorstep showdown, one of the most famous scenes in Coronation Street. The whole throttling and the shrieking and the running
Knocking
around.
on the door.
Yeah.
That was such an incredible scene. William Roach, really pretty. I mean, we say what you like about his acting now, is not always up to par necessarily, but I thought it was great. Really, really good scene. Always shown on clip shows.
Despite all of that, they stayed together, and by the end of the year, they bought number one from good old Uncle Albert.
Yep, and that's where they've stayed ever since, isn't it? And mostly between 1984 to 1986, Deirdre was a bit on the sidelines in the show. She just mostly featured in Ken's storylines, really. But in 1987, she was elected a local councillor. She stood against Alf Roberts because there was some fallout between him and Ken over politics. And then she volunteered to go to an environmental health conference in Bournemouth. But that meant abandoning Tracy. She was really into this council work. So Ken, rather spitefully, printed letters criticising his own wife in the recorder, blaming her use of the taxpayers' money to jet off down to Bournemouth. He was just mad about how she was neglecting Tracy, who'd been in hospital with appendicitis at the time.
So he didn't write the letters. He was just being an impartial journalist, was he?
Yeah, yes, impartial. I don't think Ken's ever been impartial about anything in his life.
I guess in some ways it's quite laudable that he wouldn't censor people's public opinion.
Oh, yes.
But on the other hand, what a git. In 1988, on Christmas Day, she was held against her will by Brian Roscoe, who was a homeless man she got involved with through her council work.
And then in 1989, she was accused of leaking council information to Ken, but it turns out that the real mole was Wendy Crozier.
What?
Yeah, flaming woman, who Ken had been having an affair with.
What?
I know, shock. Ken, naughty boy. So Deirdre threw Ken out on New Year's Eve, and that was the turning point into the 90s.
Yep, in 1990 she divorced him and she started dating the plumber Dave Barton, who was played by David Beckett, who became Anne's partner in life. She agreed to sell up to Newton and Ridley. He wanted to expand into an American-style bar.
Yeah, they wanted to knock through into number one and have this massive bar there, and Deirdre was not popular after that.
Is that like code for TGI Fridays, which is the only American-style bar franchise that we have?
They made up a name for it. I can't remember what it was.
Was it called TGI Saturdays or
I can't.
Fucking Fridays?
I honestly can't remember, but can you imagine that? I mean, I wonder whether that at the time, because was that before the era of spoilers? Did viewers at the time think, oh, I hope they don't do that? Or maybe hopefully people were sensible enough to think, no, they are not going to get rid of the Rovers.
Was it called It's the Weekend?
Yeah, thank heavens, but weekend.
Right, so the plan did not go through, in case you didn't realise that, and Deirdre was left shamefaced in front of the neighbours, who kind of thought that she had turned her back on their northern way of life. Ken obsessed over Deirdre and got a job at Tracy's school to try to get closer to her. Yeah. And then she started to worry about Ken hounding her and driving Dave away. She started seeing arcade owner Phil Jennings, who threatened to break Ken's legs if he kept pestering Deirdre, which is always something you could try.
Somebody's pestering
in real life. Don't do that.
Ken, poor old Ken. Ken ended up trying to kill himself over this. Look, 1991 then. So Alf stood against Deirdre in the council elections, and Dave led a smear campaign against him. But he won anyway. Now Phil had money problems at that time, and Deirdre was stunned to find that he was fleeing the country with his wife.
Bum, bum, bum.
I know. So Deirdre left in the lurch again and went back to work in the corner shop.
In 1993, she left to look after Blanche. She, as you remember, moved to Kenilworth. And she'd had a stroke, poor Blanche, and she returns to find that Ken is expecting a child with his new girlfriend Denise.
Denise, the hairdresser. So after Ken had said, "Don't want any children, not interested in any more children," should I say? That's not what you want to come.
He went,
back
whoops.
to. Yeah,
Oh
so
dear.
This was the time when Anne was off with her own illness, so she had to be written out of the show for a bit. When she came back, though, I think I remember seeing that they were going to have her reconcile with Ken, but then the illness got in the way and everything, and they had to change it. Say that she was away in Morocco for part of it as well. That wasn't visiting Blanche, but she went to Morocco, and there Deirdre was romanced by 21-year-old waiter Samir. He came to visit her in Weatherfield, and then ended up staying, despite his insecurities about the Western world. So he moved into number one with Deirdre, much to Tracy's horror, and I think everyone kind of looked at this and thought, what on earth has gone here? I mean, okay, holiday romance, that's one thing, but having him move back to you to live with you is another matter entirely, especially if he's quite a bit younger than you. But anyway, immigration officers then caught up with Samir. So Deirdre's like, oh, let's get married then. Nobody actually believes that they are in love, though, so they decided to prove it by emigrating to Morocco.
Nice couscous. In 1995, she rushed back to Weatherfield because Tracy went into a drug-induced coma and she needed a kidney. Where's she going to get it from? Samir. Oh, good. He offered to give her his own kidney. But on the way, as we said earlier, he was attacked, he was mugged, and he died. Unfortunate. But they still harvested his organs.
Yeah.
Waste not, want not. Deirdre blamed Tracy, who moved to Blackpool, because that's the way how you get back to your mum.
Yeah.
Moved to Blackpool. And she ends up cleaning Mike Baldwin's flat.
Yes.
Or flats.
Flats, yes. So the next couple of years, she was employed as an assistant to Alec Gilroy at Sunliners, the travel agency. And in 1997, she nearly reconciled with Ken, but found him in bed with headmistress Sue Jeffers. She was made manager of Sunliners that year as well, and fell for pilot John Lindsay. Thanks to Ken, she discovered that he was actually just a tie salesman.
Ken.
And she forgave him. So this was a brilliant storyline. So he was a bit of a Lewis Archer, really, a bit of a schmoozer and a con man at the same time. And Ken didn't like him, and then he discovered when he was at the airport for some reason, John was just selling ties there, and she then went and confronted John, sort of saying, "Lie your way out of this one," but he was like, "Oh yeah, sorry." She gave him like £5,000 for a house deposit then, and he proposes. But
I would have proposed if you give me $5,000.
Yeah, she discovered that he was still living with his wife, and that led to another doorstep confrontation between Deirdre and, well, Mrs. Lindsay and John in New Year that year.
In 1998, she withdraws £5,000, presumably what she had given him for the deposit from the joint account, but she got arrested for fraud because it turns out the account was actually in the name of Captain Jenkins, and Ken doesn't think that she's innocent, but Mike does. Good old Mike. And in court, John paints Deirdre as the mastermind behind the whole thing, and she ends up going down for 18 months.
Yeah, so
he was the whole Weatherfield one.
Free the Weatherfield one. Can you believe?
We knew she was innocent, but the court didn't believe it. It was a miscarriage of justice.
Yeah, all John. Can you believe how big a thing? Do you remember when that came out in the press? I mean, obviously you weren't watching Coronation Street then. It doesn't really make sense that people got so annoyed by the fact that Deirdre has been wrongly imprisoned. I think wrong imprisonment is a bit par of the course these days on soaps, isn't it? But
it goes to show you why they keep desperately sort of reaching for more and more kind of controversial and outlandish storylines.
To try and catch the attention of.
I mean, some of the things that Deirdre has been involved in were kind of very run-of-the-mill storylines, really. But at the time that they were done, were very sort of, they hadn't been done before and captured the imagination of people. I think it's just kind of being on that first wave of being in the soap and stuff.
The thing that I found bizarre was that when she was then released from prison, all the tabloids were saying, "Oh, we managed to get Deirdre freed."
I know.
When actually, I mean,
the Sun who said that.
Yeah, I think so. And then, but actually, they obviously must have filmed her release even before they'd even shown her imprisonment on screen. It was crazy. But one thing that came out of that, which was brilliant, was Jackie Dobbs, her cellmate, was played by Margie Clark, and sort of took Deirdre under her wing a little bit in prison. And thanks to Jackie Dobbs, we've also got Tyrone Dobbs to come out of that storyline as well, which I'm very grateful for.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, so she was released from prison anyway, because they managed. Mike tirelessly worked to try and free her, and they found another woman that John had conned. So she was released and turned down Ken's offer to move into number 1. Not surprisingly, after how Ken didn't really believe her, and she shared house with Liz for a bit, and she reluctantly housed Jackie Dobbs when she was released from prison, and Tyrone for a couple of weeks as well.
In 1999, we got the return of Blanche. She came back to Weatherfield, and she played Cupid to get Deirdre and Ken back together again.
Hooray! Good old Blanche.
Yeah.
So she quit her job at the factory in 2000 and got to work in Dev's corner shop again. Oh, Deirdre.
In 2001, she overheard that Ken's daughter Susan didn't actually have an abortion. And so she told Dev, who told Mike, who ended up getting Susan killed in a car accident.
Yeah, Mike went then chasing Susan down the motorway to find out the truth, and car accident.
And then Deirdre slept with Dev. Because she had a row with Ken and Peter.
One of Coronation Street's most disgusting moments, I think.
I mean, really, we complained about Peter and Tina, but oh dear.
Nobody wants to see Dev.
Nobody liked that scene, I don't think, apart from maybe Hancock. So, fortunately for everyone, Dev was not interested in taking it any further than that.
No.
And in 2003, he actually started dating Tracy, which meant that Deirdre had to confess her fling to both Tracy and Ken. Ken was horrified, but he agreed to work with her through it.
Yes.
What a noble chap.
Now, there was a blast from the past in 2005 when Ray Langton came back to the street, who was dying of cancer. He wanted to kind of die where in the streets where he grew up, I think. And in that year, Ken and Deirdre got engaged and married again. And the big shock of the day was when Ray Langton died during their wedding reception in one of the booths in the Rovers. Now, that wedding day was also at the same time as Prince Charles's wedding, because he'd was marrying Camilla at that time, although it had been scheduled to be on the same day, but after the Pope had died, I think it was the royal wedding was put back a day, I might be right in saying. But anyway, in any case, Coronation Street still wiped the floor with Charles and Camilla's wedding. I watched both. Did you watch Charles and Camilla's wedding?
I did. I remember watching, because it was in Windsor Town Hall, wasn't it, or something?
Yeah.
It couldn't be in a church, because obviously he was divorced.
Yeah.
And I remember watching interviews with the brides who happened to have booked their weddings the same day, and there were all these like cameras and stuff, and they were like, I just want to get married, leave me alone.
If you were married on the same day, would you be more happy about saying that you got married on the same day as those two, or Ken and Deirdre? I think I know what my bigger claim to fame would be.
I think I do as well. Well, Charles and Camilla are not exactly the nation's favourite couple, are they? Bless them, even though I like Camilla.
I don't mind Camilla.
No, she's better than Charles, honestly. Anyway, we're not here to talk about them. We're here to talk about Deirdre, because in 2006, she annoyed Ken when Mike died in his arms. And she was very sad about it, and he didn't know why. He didn't understand.
We haven't really talked about the Ken and Mike rivalry that stemmed from the 1983 affair, but that went all the way through pretty much to then, and then Mike had his Alzheimer's, didn't he? Got out of hospital, died of pneumonia, sort of saying Deirdre's mine, Barlow, because he completely lost it by then, and that really hit Deirdre hard, but Ken didn't appreciate it.
Not really, no.
In 2007, there was a two-hander episode between Deirdre and Tracy. Now, this was after Tracy had killed Charlie Stubbs and told everyone that he'd been abusing her and there'd been domestic abuse and everything, and she killed him by self-defense. But in this two-hander, Tracy said, actually, I planned it all. It was all me, and Deirdre had to try and keep this a secret. So there were more rows that followed between Deirdre and Ken left her to try and reconcile with former lover Denise, who was the one that he'd had that other son with, and then Deirdre ended up slapping her. But Ken decided eventually to go back to Deirdre, as we know.
Who doesn't admire a woman with a good right hand? In 2009, Ken decided to do a bit of boating.
This is such a funny storyline.
He had an affair with the voluptuous and gorgeous Martha Fraser, who was
actress extraordinaire.
Very in a sort of higher tier than
Who was it
Deirdre,
that played her?
I've totally forgotten.
Famous
Stephanie Beecham.
Oh yeah, that's right.
She's a lovey anyway, and
Yeah.
she played a lovey, and she was just glamorous and sort of this really scrummy, sort of older, mature woman.
With a very own barge and
Lived on
everything.
a barge and everything. And he kept taking Eccles for extended walks on this barge. And that's how she found out in the end, wasn't it? Eccles kind of something to do with Eccles dobbing him in or something like that.
I think Ken might have confessed in the end because
I remember
Martha.
Eccles walking off to the barge at one point, or maybe that
Maybe.
was just a dream I had.
I remember Martha was going to sail away, and Ken had to make the decision
That's
about
right.
whether he was going to stay with her or not. And in the end, I can't remember what happened. Either she sailed off without him, or he was in two minds, and it was too late or something. But I always remember a really funny cut between scenes during that storyline because Martha was so wonderful, and she was obviously an amazing cook as well, which we all know Deirdre isn't. And she was cooking Ken this delicious homemade soup and everything, and Ken was saying how lovely it was. And then we cut to a scene back home of Deirdre getting the same soup out of a tin, and it was just this giant, this big column of gelatinous smush
Lord.
into the...
I tell you what, the one thing I can say that I will always be able to win you over with is food.
Yeah. No match for you,
I
darling.
don't stuff marrows.
Yeah, that's another pro, isn't it? 'Cause I wouldn't even like it.
So where are we at here? So that was 2009 when he had the affair.
Yeah, and she was made redundant from the council that year as well.
That was sad. Yeah. Right, now 2010, that was when Maggie Jones died.
Yeah,
It's really sad to think that was only 5 years ago, and now they're both gone.
Yeah.
So she obviously didn't die on the street.
No, I think she might have died in autumn 2009. And
Yeah,
then obviously
she
there's
that
the
was been a
grieving
while.
period
Yeah.
and before they
So
showed
she
it.
found out in 2010 that Blanche had died, and then she gets involved with Lewis Archer. And she flirts with him, but that was when he was having a bit of a scam at the bookies, because she worked there, didn't she?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it was
she
revealed
gets-
on tape, wasn't it? Because they were filmed, and I can't remember why they ended up showing the video at the Platt household, but I remember the scene when it gets shown on the CCTV, and Gail ends up throwing a Manchester tart in Deirdre's face. Another very, very famous scene, because was Gail saying Lewis at the time, or was Audrey? I don't even remember. He managed to work his way around through some of the quite a lot of the older women at that time, didn't they?
he did indeed. He went through them. He was like decimating the ranks. Gail got annoyed,
Yes.
threw a Manchester tart in her face,
Yes.
and that was when we had to look up what is a Manchester tart,
Yes.
and I don't remember what it was. And that was also a year. It was good and bad, really, because Tracy got let out of prison early, didn't she?
Yeah.
She came out to go to Blanche's funeral,
Yeah. She was out for a bit, and just,
then I think the writers went, okay, she's all right, let's get her back out again.
that was the year that Gail was in prison as well, wasn't it? And she was cellmates with Tracy, so they had those in prison. It was a bit like the Peter and Jim stuff this year, wasn't it?
It's really cool when they do that. I really like it.
Yeah, just bringing back the old faces. So that was 2010, obviously big year in Coronation Street for the tram crash, and then Tracy shows up during the memorial service like a week later, doesn't she?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, the biggest arrival on Christmas Day ever, and it was a really bad re-entrance for Tracy, to be honest. I don't think Kate Ford did a very good job there at all, but she has definitely gone up in my estimation since. But Deirdre was happy with it anyway. 2012, Tracy collapsed of liver failure because they remembered that she had a donor kidney, and she only one kidney. And Tracy apologised to Deirdre for all the trouble that she'd caused. Deirdre was also suspicious with Ken that year because he was reunited with former lover Wendy Crozier, but he showed her the door, and that was our first autumn on the podcast, wasn't it? Wendy Crozier coming back, and we were like, oh, is Ken going to stay with her? I hope not. What's good? They can't come between him and Deirdre. But yeah, luckily, I think it was on a Halloween episode that year. Ken decided quite rightly to stay with his wife.
Good for him.
Yeah.
2013, this was when it sort of went a bit weird. This was when Ken left
Yeah, because of
to go to Canada to look after Adam. But as we know, this was a cover story for the fact that William Roach had been involved in various allegations and had to defend himself in court. So it feels really bad that the last sort of 3 years of the story between Deirdre and Ken have kind of been under a cloud,
separate,
really. Because as we know, we didn't know at the time whether William Roach would be found guilty or not. So it could have been a very bleak end to that storyline.
But it was at least a real turnaround for Deirdre as a character, wasn't it?
It was good and bad in a way, because Deirdre was sort of forced to stand by herself on her own merits without Ken as kind of like the straight man to play against. And to be honest, up until that point, Ken had been a kind of prop, really, who sat on his laptop and sort of made snidey comments. And
yeah, he was a little bit, wasn't he? But she came into her own so much, and they had so many good comedy ideas for her. I mean, there was all her belts, wasn't there, that she was talking about, and the pottery that she was just awful at. But she thought she was so good as a funny bit, wasn't she? And everyone else was kind of like giving sideways glances to each other when she brought out her next awful ceramic. And then the stuffed marrow came from, I think there was a story when she was cooking it for Audrey or something, and then it all went mushy, and Deirdre was like, "Oh, it's not too bad, is it? It's okay." And Audrey obviously she was very polite about it, and then Deirdre was like, "Oh, I can give you the recipe if you like," and Audrey was like, "No, you're all right."
What kind of stuffed marrow do they have on the show?
I don't even know.
Because, I mean, I like my mum used to make it, and it's really all right.
I think it's just like, it doesn't sound nice.
No,
but maybe it's because I don't like marrow. It just sounds like horrible, watery stodge to me.
Yeah, but when I make it, it's, you know, that like the bolognese sauce I make, it's just that inside a ring of marrow with cheese on the top.
Yeah, it's just like showing that Deirdre can't cook. But
I literally haven't made it for about 10 years.
Yeah, and then they just used it as a recurring joke, didn't they, almost? Like when Deirdre was like, "Oh, I'll make my stuffed marrow tonight," and then Tracy would make for the nearest exit.
It does sound vaguely vulgar as well.
I think it is as well, isn't it? It
sounds
does.
Slightly sexual.
Oh, I'm going to stuff my marrow tonight.
I can't wait.
So then, 2014 then, Deirdre's final year in the show, Deirdre stuck by Peter when he was accused of killing Tina, although she did recommend that he pled guilty when it came to the trial.
She kind of wavered in between.
Yeah, there was just
a
moment
believe
of
him or do I not, and she kind of got herself influenced by what other people were saying quite a lot as well.
Yeah, and said,
I
to be on the safe
in
side.
In a vacuum, she would have totally been behind him, but when everyone was saying, no, he did it, he must have done it, he obviously did it, who else would have done it? She let herself sort of doubt a little bit.
Yeah. So last summer, that was when Ken came back from Canada finally, and William Roach had been found not guilty, thank goodness. And then, yes, Deirdre's final storyline, I guess, was having to hide from Ken all the drama that had been going on for Peter's alcoholism and Tina's murder and everything, and that was obviously a really difficult time for Deirdre. She'd been lying to him so long, or not telling the truth, and then when he came back, arguments aplenty between Deirdre and Ken, but at least they did then get off to Wales for that week, and I was really looking forward to that storyline in Wales. And although the episode there was good, particularly that stare off with the sheep that we mentioned earlier on in the episode, it's hilarious. It was just a shame that it was kind of over and done with in a week, but at least it meant that after that things were running a bit more smoothly between Ken and Deirdre at the end. As the trial approached, Deirdre just couldn't cope with it. Too much stress. Tracy was getting engaged as well, so there were wedding plans. And our last scene was smashing a trifle up against the wall. Because as we know, jelly shouldn't run, it should wobble.
That is exactly it. And as someone who can cook, I would like to say this is correct.
Are trifles difficult to make, though?
Not really.
They are trifle difficult.
Although I do remember the one I made for our 80s party was a bit wobbly.
It was supposed to wobble. Or was it a bit runny?
No, it was a bit runny. I'm going to hold my hands up there and say it was a bit runny. I didn't throw it anywhere. I just ate it.
Yeah. I just always wonder now what was going through Anne's head during those scenes, because that's when she had to leave off for personal reasons. Did she know that she was ill then? Was she stressed? I mean, I assume she must have been, but she kept on acting fantastically all back then, and it's like you said before, at least she went out on a bit of a high and people loved her, and it wasn't just kind of fading away.
I really think that, barring a proper exit storyline, she went out in the best way she could have done. I mean, it was silly the way that they wrote her out.
The thing, often what happens when there's these sudden departures is they're just in the middle of a storyline or off screen or whatever, and then somebody says, oh yeah, and she's gone off to visit her sick mother or whatever, and she doesn't get any kind of exit, and at least she did get that, I suppose. Maybe I don't think we saw her saying goodbye or anything, but I mean, it was a high point to end on, I suppose, something that's going to be memorable at least. So such a long history on the street. What's been your favourite Deirdre moment of them all?
Really, I always like Deirdre in a comedy scene, whether she's kind of arguing with Tracy or just kind of relaxing with her friends and stuff.
The banter with Blanche as well.
Yeah, I just think, because I didn't really see any of her dramatic storylines.
No.
I've only really seen her as sort of a comic character, and there was a bit of time when we were kind of not really certain about what the point of her was. A bit like Gail.
Yeah, the difference between her and Gail was that, I mean, Gail was almost a bit of too much of a figure of fun, and she'd just turned into this sad old Mrs. Mop lady.
The difference between the two actresses is that you really felt like Anne Kirkbride was laughing with you, and she could make fun of the character whilst also being true to that character as well. Whereas with Gail, I found it slightly a bit fake and a bit demeaning as well to the character, and a bit kind of hammed up, whereas Anne could just ham it up and it was still funny. It was still so funny, and just kind of like her costume with her funny belts and her big glasses and
and the neck. I mean, we've got to say the neck. We haven't mentioned the neck, but that stringy neck is always going to be a memory for me for Deirdre. So, I mean, it's difficult for me to say my favourite storyline. I'm not going to say the love triangle, because although I watched it on Classic, that was before my time. I think it's got to be the John Lindsay storyline, really. That was one of the early ones when I was watching, and I got so gripped by that, and I felt just as outraged when I found out that John wasn't actually a pilot, and it was total shocks. And that was back in the days when I didn't see any spoilers or anything as well. And when Deirdre went down for the fraud, although I wasn't sort of out on the street with my placard or anything, I did hope that Deirdre would come out as well. It's really, really memorable, and I'd love it if like John Lindsay would come back or something. I mean, it's not appropriate now, but that was definitely my favourite Deirdre storyline. But there's so many, and like you said, the comedy stuff these recent years has been fantastic as well.
And that was our Deirdre Barlow profile. We cut off quite abruptly there, because later on in the podcast, or later on in the profile, should I say, we just started talking about how they're going to write her out, kind of being a bit speculative about
what the future was,
how
for
the show was going to deal with
it,
exactly.
And obviously now we know how the exit for Deirdre was handled. But at the time we didn't know how long it would be, what they would say had happened to her, whether she would have died or anything. But so what actually happened in the show was Deirdre was set to return in July 2015. They were having a party because she was coming home, and it was also her 60th birthday.
Yeah, she'd been over at Dev's house, not Dev. No, return to Dev after that night of passion. Bev's house, should I say.
Yeah, so they had a party set up in the Rovers.
Yeah, and then Bev Unwin, so Shelley's mum, came over and broke the sad news to Ken and Tracy and everybody that Deirdre had passed away that morning. She was, I think, sitting out in the garden and just collapsed of a suspected brain aneurysm. Yeah,
well, Liz then had to tell everybody in the Rovers what had happened.
And to be fair, I think that they gave her a very good send-off. It was very respectful. There was a great funeral episode, although they also did kind of tie it in with Tracy trying to get her leg over with Robert Preston, who had just been recently reintroduced just for that occasion.
Yeah.
And then go on.
We also found out that the reason Deirdre hadn't come back before then was because she was humiliated about Tracy having an affair with Liz, who was her best friend's boyfriend, Tony Stewart.
Yeah, so it did lead to a bit of a falling out between Ken and Tracy.
Yes.
but they're best of friends now.
Yeah.
Well, father-daughter,
As far as they can
as best
ever
as you
be,
can,
yeah.
And I thought that as well as the funeral being done well, there was an excellent episode afterwards, which had similar to the recent 10,000th episode. Really, lots of really great character moments. Just sitting down having a chat about things, bringing back Bev Unwin's character just for this one episode worked really well to tie up a few loose ends. She made up with Audrey. They talked about Fred, and it was a real nice moment for fans sort of in the wake of this awful tragedy that had happened off screen. So yeah, I think she had a good send off, and she's always going to be remembered as one of Corrie's most the greatest characters, honestly, isn't she?
Iconic.
Totally iconic. So hope you enjoyed reminiscing back over our Deirdre character profile, and that's all for now. Thank you for listening.